Let's talk a little bit about the benefits of fasting and how it relates to slowing down or even reversing aging.
Well, these systems that tell cells how to read the genes at the right time, this epigenome, there are factors that control that. A little bit of biology here. DNA isn't just floating around the cell, it's actually looped into big loops that tell genes to be switched on. And genes that should be switched off are bundled up tightly, and we call this stuff chromatin. And those loops of genes that are on and bundles of genes that are off are controlled in part by a set of genes called the sirtuins. And those genes make proteins that cause these loops and bundles, particularly they create these bundles to keep genes switched off. Because you don't want a liver gene or a skin gene coming on in the brain. But that's what happens with aging, we find. So one way to make sure this process goes slower is to turn on these sirtuin epigenetic regulators, to use a more technical term. And there are 7 of these epigenetic regulators, the things that prevent the scratches. And we can turn them on with gene therapy. In mice, we do this. And if you do it in the brain of a mouse, they'll live longer. Do it in the body, they can live longer. But we can't genetically modify ourselves. We've also found is that these genes get turned on by adversity, or at least perceived adversity. If our body thinks we're going to run out of food, or we need to run away from a saber-toothed tiger, or we're chasing a mastodon, then our body says, oh, times might be tough. Don't put all our energy and resources into growing bigger muscles. In fact, put some of that energy into surviving, hunkering down and defending the body against toxins, against damage. And that we know leads to longer life. It slows down this clock of epigenetic changes, which we can measure. And we also know that the ways to mimic adversity include skipping meals, eating less protein in general, being hot and cold, and then the big one is eating the right types of food that we all know are healthy, Mediterranean type diet. And there are actually chemicals within those foods of a Mediterranean diet, in olive oil and red wine, that we found in my lab to activate these sirtuins and probably also slow down the clock, but they certainly improve health. And then the last thing, Shane, that I think is really important is what I'm working on is not about keeping people older at the end of life and alive for longer. It's the opposite. We're keeping animals, and increasingly we're showing with people, that you can keep them younger for longer, so that when you're 80, you can actually be 60. One is we're not talking about malnutrition or starvation. That would not be beneficial. And in fact, when 10,000 years ago or more, people were not living a long time from fasting because they were not getting enough nutrition. But in our world now, we can have not energy drinks, but drinks that contain enough nutrients. We can make sure that we're not deficient. We can measure things with blood tests, and we can make sure that we're not deficient. But the second point is that the optimum is different for everybody, in part because we have different tolerances for not eating, but also because we have different microbiomes, we're different genders, we just are genetically different. And we know from studies in mice that you can take regular lab mice and breed them in a way that you get a little bit of diversity in these lab mice, and give them caloric restrictions, so you don't feed them more than, I think it was 40% what they would normally eat. And some mice breeds, strains we call them, lived a lot longer. Some of them died earlier. But practically, what should you do? Well, it seems to be a rule that if you fast at least 14 hours, you'll have a lot of health benefits, better metabolic stability, lower blood sugar levels, better cholesterol, these kind of things kick in. Popular one is 16-8, go for 16 hours. So you skip one meal a day and have a late lunch or an early lunch, depending on which one you're skipping. And that uses the period of sleep as a fasting state. And then what I do is I skip breakfast, and often I skip lunch as well. And so I'm getting actually more like 20 hours of fasting on a good day. I will say that today I had a little bit of avocado for breakfast because I had to get up really early. So I'm not perfect, and I don't think anyone should strive to be perfect, but you do what you can. Now, there are other people that do a week-long fast. Now that's the other extreme. I wouldn't go further than a week, actually, given what I know. But once you've gone more than 3 days, there's a special type of recycling of proteins that's very beneficial, called autophagy or autophagy. And that takes about 3 days. Now, I've never done that myself. I'm pretty wimpy when it comes to these kind of things. I'm a hedonist by nature and very lazy. But I think that if you can go 3 days or 4 days, that would be occasionally, not of course not every week, but you could do that every few weeks. And if you do a week-long fast, you want to do that maybe 4 times a year. And those are the rough guidelines.
If we fast for 2 meals and then on the third meal we eat as many calories as we would have eaten during the rest of the day normally, are we still getting benefits of fasting?
Yes.
Or does it sort of...
Yes. We are. That's the great news. Take me, for example. I have big dinners because I'm making up for the lack of food during the day. And so I'm not losing weight. Once you've hit a set point and you've got your body weight, and during COVID, I dropped from 150 pounds to 132. I'm now steady at that 132, feeling great, eating tons of food that I always wanted, but it's packed into an hour or 2 of feeding. Now, how do we know that works? Well, we know from blood tests in humans that it looks like it's beneficial. You get the kind of changes that are seen in younger people, things like I mentioned blood glucose, and then there's hormone levels and stress levels, which I've been measuring in myself for a decade, so I can tell you for me it works. But the other thing that's important is that from animal studies that have been done over the last 100 years in mice and rats and dogs, it's very clear that it's not just what you eat, it's when you eat.